I am going to share a story from my life, and I want to begin by saying that I recognize that our stories sometimes have sorrowful chapters, and this is going to be a sorrowful chapter from my life when I was 7 years old. Our family lived in Hawaii. My dad was a pilot with the Air Force, and we had been to the beach. It was a few days after Christmas. The cooler was drying on the lawn, and all the kids of the neighborhood were playing, and we decided to play hide and seek. And so after a few hours, my dad rounded me up as the oldest, and he said, "Will you bring everyone in for dinner?" And I said, "Sure." I looked around. I remember the street lights going off, the sound of my flip-flops. And I went in and I said, "I found Ricky and I found Julie, but I didn't find Gregory." So my dad got in his car Mangia. He went around the block. He pulled up in the driveway, and he saw that the cooler was closed, and his greatest fear was realized that his little 4-year-old son had been locked in that cooler. Now, those kind of coolers, I understand, are outlawed now. In those days, lots of accidents happened, which were truly sorrowful. So that rocked our worlds, all of ours. My dad was 27, and he had 5 kids, and one on the way, and one had just died. And I was the oldest, and I was 7. And the only thing that was ever told me about my brother dying was that he's in heaven with God. There was no processing, no talking. I have a lot of compassion on my parents that they were very young and very overwhelmed, and they were in grief. They were struggling. It was hard for them. I don't blame them. But I didn't grow up with anyone allowing me to talk and process this. So no wonder that fast forward into the future, I become someone, I forgot to say this part. When I was that little, 7 years old, my way to handle it was to make a vow. I made a vow, a promise to myself. My promise was this: I'm going to do such a good job of taking care of everyone that no one will get hurt on my watch. No one will get hurt. Which meant I was a very vigilant, very responsible daughter and sister. And that was hard work. It was exhausting. Like I said, big family. I'm still the oldest of 6. Big family, hard work. But I was doing it because I'd made a vow, and that's a powerful thing when we do that, when we make vows to ourselves. Then, it's fast forward into the future. No surprise that I'm in ministry because I'm a caring person and I'm in a caring field. I'm working with children in a church and a school. And I have the opportunity to go to a seminar where we're learning about ways to help children process their grief and their pain. And the leader was using something called Theophostic Prayer Ministry. If you haven't heard about that, I recommend you do. It's pretty amazing. Basically what it is it's a ministry where you invite Jesus to the place where you had the emotional wound, and he speaks truth to you, and you're healed. It's beautiful. It's great. I didn't know this at that time. I was just at the training. And the leader said, "I need someone to be a subject that we could practice this on. Lauren, would you like to do that?" And I said, "I would love to. That would be great." So she said, "I want you to remember a time where you had pain as a child." And I always go back to that experience. So I went back to it. My eyes were closed. She asked me to pray. She was praying over me. And all of a sudden, with my eyes closed, I had a picture of Jesus handing me a very small cross. So out loud I said, and this is a training room with a lot of people there, leaders of children. I say, "Well, of course, he's handing me a cross." I was a little frustrated because at that time in my life as an adult, I had spent so many years bearing crosses and burdens, and I was kind of wiped out. I have a brother who's a meth addict, and he lived in Alaska. He's lost to us. Couldn't save him. My parents had had a messy divorce. My mom was really unhappy. I couldn't save her. Lots of friends had troubles. A friend's son became schizophrenic. Just painful things. Real life, right? Real life happens. Real life is hard. So I was really weary, and she was still praying for me. And she said, "Stay with that image of Jesus handing you the cross. Just stay with it." Closed my eyes again, waited. Pretty soon, the picture changed, and Jesus gestured that he wanted something that was on my back. And he let me know that it was a very heavy cross, and he said, "Give me that one." That one's mine. I want you to have the small one. He was doing an exchange. I was crying. I could hear people in the room crying. All those leaders there, learning about how to heal children from pain. And here was this grown woman with a child in her that was being healed of the pain that I'd carried for so long. And so the verse that I've chosen, I could have chosen a lot of verses because this is a life story of mine that has touched my life in many ways. But the one I chose for today is from Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30, where Jesus says to me, and he says to you, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavily burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Well, I love that reason, for all the reasons that Tammie's going to share, wonderful reasons she's going to highlight for us. But I also love this verse for me that he says, "Learn from me." I just celebrated a birthday this hot week. I'm still learning from him. I also love that he says, "I'll find rest." So since that day of healing where he touched my heart, I have found more rest. I don't think it's a surprise that he redeems the painful things in our lives. Even before I was healed, he allowed me to do work with children. He gave me eyes to see when children had pain. He redeemed that terrible thing. He turned it into something that could become beautiful. He's good at that. And I know now, I've learned to not take the heavy cross. When things come my way, people come my way, I'll take the small one. He can have the heavy one. Thank you.
So I don't know about you, but I like to receive invitations. Do you like to get invitations in the email or in the mail? I do. Well, one, because I'm an extrovert and I like parties. I like social gatherings. I like to go hang out with everybody and all of those kinds of things. But even if I can't go to an event, I like to get an invitation because it means somebody thought of me, right? They wanted to include me. They wanted me to be a part of whatever it is that they're celebrating. And to me, that's enjoyable and it feels good, right? Well, at the bottom of an invitation, we typically see 4 letters, right? That looks familiar. RSVP. And please do not give me a hard time for slaughtering the French, but it comes from the French. That means répondez s'il vous plaît, right? Please respond, right? Please give us an answer of whether or not you're going to attend. And most of us, we understand that. We've grown up in that culture. But there's a story of an Eastern European couple who came to the U.S., and they got their first wedding invitation, and they were very excited. And then at the bottom, they saw these 4 letters. And the husband says, "Wife, what is this? Do you know?" Again, pardon my speaking. "What is this? This RSVP?" And she shrugs her shoulders, and she doesn't know. And they put their heads together, and they think, and they think. And then he says, "Wife, I know what it is. It is, remember, send wedding present." And what's unfortunate about that, whether it's humorous or not, is that they have taken what was extended to them as a joyous invitation to participate in a celebration and turned it into a demand, a burden. And that's so often what happens when Jesus invites us to participate with him in something. It becomes a burden. And that was true for the people he was teaching in his time. And so we're going to take a look at that this morning in Matthew chapter 11, beginning with verse 25. We're going back a few verses from where Lauren read. At that time, Jesus said, "I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for this way was well-pleasing in your sight. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal him. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and hear and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Lord, thank you for your word. As we look at it now, may we find peace and comfort in trying times and in the knowledge that you are with us as we look into this passage. Thank you. Amen. So this passage comes in contrast to what has preceded. In the previous verses and even chapter, Jesus has faced a series of rejections from the religious leaders, and even John the Baptist, his colleague and friend, has questioned who he is and what he's doing. And so in face of all of this rejection, Jesus turns to acknowledge what God is doing. And he says in verses, yes, we just read it, but this is what we do. We're going to do it again. In verses 25 and 26, this is how he responds to all that rejection. He says, but I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for this way was well-pleasing in your sight. I praise you. I acknowledge you. I recognize the fact that you, God, have a plan. There is a well-known saying that God confounds the wise. He does not act in accordance with the way we think or expect him to act, or even sometimes how we demand that he act. That is not how he responds. And Jesus is saying, but God, I know you have a plan. And just because all of those who are the religious leaders who have waited for a Messiah for so long, now the Messiah is here and they can't see him, it's because you have a plan for something different. Hidden from the wise and intelligent. Does that mean people who are smart can't know God? Well, we have a lot of smart people in our congregation, so obviously that's not true. And is it only for people who are unintelligent? No, that's not true. So it's hidden from those who are wise and intelligent in their own eyes. They see themselves as wise and intelligent, and therefore they don't need to learn anything from Jesus. The scribes and the Pharisees, they're so caught up in the law that they don't see the message that Jesus has, because it's not about the law, or at least the law the way they interpret it. It's not about the heart. His message is about the heart of the law. Infants, babes, in different translations, but those that are uninitiated in the law, those who are not caught up in it. And it's a nod to what Jesus is going to say in Matthew 18:3. He again points out the need for the attitude that comes with him. Jesus said, truly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Those who are innocent, humble, and most of all, teachable, ready to learn from Jesus. Now, the idea that the law had become a burden, and the idea that people thought it was what was going to get them into heaven, was questioned by others before Jesus. And there are several rabbinical parables that address this. Now, what's a rabbinical parable? That is a parable created and told by a rabbi. So, all of Jesus' parables are rabbinical parables. But there were lots of other rabbis that used parables to teach too. It wasn't something unique to the way Jesus taught. It was a very common form of teaching among rabbis. And so a rabbi that precedes Jesus had a parable that he was in the marketplace, and Elijah came and appeared to him, and he went to Elijah and he said, who here would be worthy of God's kingdom? and eternal life. And Elijah looks around. Nope, nobody. And then he says, oh, wait, that gentleman over there. So the rabbi goes over and he asks the man, who are you and what do you do? He says, I'm the jailer. The jailer. I put myself between the men and the women of the jail at night. I lay my cot between them to protect the women from the men and to keep any from falling into adultery. I protect their purity. And then Elijah says, yeah, there's two guys over there as well. And so the rabbi goes over and he asks them, who are you and what do you do? And they said, we're merrymakers. When we see somebody who is sad, heavy of heart, downtrodden, discouraged, we lift up their spirits and we make them laugh and we bring them encouragement. And if we see two people who are falling into an argument, we intervene to keep the peace. That was all that Elijah found. They weren't great keepers of the law. They were men who were gentle, humble of heart, seeking to help and serve other people. So it was not just Jesus who recognized this, but the problem had become a real issue that the law was all there was, and they'd forgotten about relationship. Let's continue reading on in verse 27. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal him. So Jesus has just acknowledged, God, you have another plan different from that of man, and I know that the greatest part of that is being a part of it. You and I know what is happening. I am one with you. You are one with me. Because a parent to a child has a very unique relationship. It is different than how anybody else knows someone. Now, one of the things that I have done besides ministry is I spent 2 years working at Neptune Society, which, although it focuses on cremation, is a funeral home. So I helped people walk through the loss of a loved one, through all of the paperwork and just the stuff that has to be done. And one of the things I assisted with was submitting obituaries, and this was on the peninsula, so one of the common places was the San Francisco Chronicle. Well, I worked with a family who came in. The mother is the one who had passed away, and I was helping them with their obituary, and she was a child actress, and she had starred this. You guys are, most all of you are way too young, but in a show from the 50s called The Little Rascals. And if you do watch the old stuff, it still shows up. You know, we have Alfalfa with the hair that sticks up and all those fun characters. And so when I submitted the obituary, the paper called me and they said, we want to offer the family a free obituary that we would write up a focus on their mother. And so I called the family, and they said no. They said the paper will want to focus on who she was in the public eye and what she did as a child, but that's not who she was. What was important to her and what was important to us is who she was as a mom, as a wife, as a volunteer in the community, as a person who loved her extended family and her neighbors, and who she was, not what she did. And often for the people of Jesus' time, what they knew of God was the stories of Moses and Elijah and Abraham and so forth, but they didn't know God. And Jesus is saying to them here in this verse, he's saying, I have the privilege and the honor of revealing you, Father, to these people, because the way they're going to know you is by looking at me. That people would know God by looking at Jesus. And after acknowledging, God, you have this great plan, and we're in relationship, and we're one on the idea of what this plan is, he issues what is commonly known as the Great Invitation in verses 28 through 30, which is what Lauren read. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This is a very common verse and passage. It's pretty well known, but there is a lot of depth and layers to it that don't always get addressed. And so we're going to peel back those layers and really dig in and take a look at this verse. So the same people that he's acknowledged are getting his message, they're the common people. And they're the ones that he is extending this invitation to. So what is this yoke that he's speaking of? Well, yoke, it was a literal thing and a symbolic thing. It symbolized anything that you submitted to. And it was a very common phrase to be called the yoke of the law, what the people had submitted themselves to, the yoke of the kingdom, and several other things. So they were familiar with the idea of a yoke. And so the people that he's addressing are the people for whom that yoke of the law had become a great burden. For the Pharisees and the scribes, it was this great honor and this great privilege because they focused on it. But if you're the common person, let's think about what it was like for them. We're pretty much all commoners, right? But we can all read and write. If you were a commoner in that time, you couldn't read and write. Literacy was only for the wealthy. So you don't have access to the law. And even if you did, you didn't have time because you were the people that worked for a living. And you were the people that had to get your hands dirty working for the scribes and the Pharisees so that they could stay clean and not break the laws. But not only did they have the law of Moses that had originally been given as a way of saying this is how you treat one another and how you respect God. Law upon law upon law had been added to that as interpretation because the Pharisees were so worried that somebody might accidentally break a law that they defined them to the nth degree. So, for example, just to make sure that nobody broke the Sabbath, they added descriptions of what that meant to break the Sabbath. So if you were a tailor, you could not carry a needle in your pocket because that might be work. And how you were to eat to be healthy and clean, there were 629 food laws. I didn't count them, but I trust the scholars that I have seen over and over, that 629 laws that told you how you could eat, what you could eat, when you could eat it, what you could eat it with, who you could eat it with, how you could cook it. How, when you don't read and write, are you ever going to have a grasp on all of that? So it wasn't a joy to them. It was just this heavy burden that they bore. And Jesus says, I want to trade all of that for my yoke. Just like Lauren's imagery, I want to give you this big cross. I want to take that big cross and I want to give you this little one. And he's saying, I want to take that burden and this is all you need. The heart of the law, not the minute detail. And I think that's well described in Micah 6:8, where the prophet says, He has told you, God has told you, oh man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? Not 629 food laws. This is what the Lord requires of you, these three things. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. Give me those thousands of laws that burden you, and I will give you these three. And there's more layers to this. So I want you to think about, he says, his yoke. His yoke. Well, think with me. So what is a yoke? It's what goes on a pair of oxen that you hook up your plow so you can work. And it sits on the oxen. But maybe what you didn't know is that every yoke had to be custom made to fit the oxen so that it wouldn't cause chafing and rubbing and bruising, right? What's a yoke made out of? You can answer. Wood. What did Jesus do before he became a preacher? He was a carpenter. So what do you think he might possibly have made? A few yokes in his time, maybe, yeah? And in fact, one legend implies that that was his specialty as a carpenter. So when you got your new oxen and you had to come and have your yokes custom made, they were always custom made for the animal, that you took your yoke to Jesus. Maybe not true, but beautiful imagery for us to think about, right? He custom makes a yoke for us. And then typically, yokes were made for two. So if he's saying, take my yoke, this yoke I have made, lined with love and mercy and grace, and pair up with me and share this with me. I'm not asking you to do this alone. I want you to be connected to me. We pull this burden together. This light yoke that I have made for you that is very different than anything you have encountered before. It is light. And whatever burden it is you're bearing, it's not just about the law, although that is a big picture that they would have gotten. He is saying, whatever it is that you carry, I'll take that. Give it to me. I want to take that for you. So if the burden you bear is grief, he says, I know that you have to bear it. I know that you have to walk through this, but do not walk through it alone. Pair up with me. Let me walk with you through this. Maybe you're burdened down with sin and guilt and regret, and you think about, all that stuff. And he says, give it to me. You know I died for that, right? You know that any of that went to the cross with me. I've got that covered. Give it up. Give it to me. Maybe you get weighed down with the idea of trying to earn your place in this world, and success and recognition and drive is the burden that you have. And Jesus says, I love you the way you are. I love you the way I created you. Focus on the gifts I gave you and use them. Don't get burdened by all that other stuff that I didn't give you. It's not yours to bear. And in our world today, especially right now in our local area, the fear and the anxiety that weighs people down. Jesus says, I overcame death. You don't face anything that I can't handle. There is no fear or no anxiety greater than my ability to carry it for you. So he says to us, I will give you rest. I will give you refreshment. I will restore you. Whatever your burden is, I'll take it. Let me have it. Don't be weighed down by all that stuff I didn't give you. I just want love and mercy and grace and kindness. It's all I expect of you, all I give to you. Carry that. Carry only that. Let's pray. Lord, I know that everybody comes with some sort of burden. A burden about their future, an anxiety, a grief, a question, a doubt, confusion. I just ask that today, each one of us can picture ourselves taking that burden. and giving it to you. and then accepting your invitation to walk with you and allow you to lift us up, to carry us, to take that burden and be the companion that we are yoked to in this life. And we submit only to your love and your grace and your mercy that you poured out for us on the cross. Amen.